Oh, 2 Heinekens. There we go. Yes, we have 2 Heinekens attached to this car. Are we ready? Oh, I didn't see. Sorry, we're joking around over here. All right, so welcome back. First of all, I'd like to make a special thank you to SIMBA Chain for their sponsoring the event and pioneering blockchain innovation. Since 2017, SIMBA Chain has simplified blockchain development, making it accessible for businesses and government entities. Their robust platform, SIMBA Blocks, empowers users to build secure, efficient blockchain applications, supporting essential functions like supply chain management and tokenization. Thank you, SIMBA Chain, for advancing technology with your groundbreaking solution. And with that, we will now have a panel that will be discussing the supply chain. And this panel will examine blockchain's impact on supply chain transparency, security, and efficiency across industries. So with that, Dan, if you'll come up here and introduce the rest of your panel, that would be fantastic.
Thank you so much for the introduction there. I'm actually not going to introduce the panel. I'll let them introduce themselves. They'll do a much better job at that. I just want to say a couple words before we start rolling with the panel, because we have an amazing panel today, of course. I got to say, being here in Washington, D.C., I'm a Canadian. This is my first trip to Washington, and really 2 days after a pretty monumental election, to be at a technology event here in Washington, to me, is amazing. We're really witnessing something special here, guys. I know we saw things like the agricultural revolution, even the digital revolution, the scientific revolution, but we're in this technological revolution right now. AI in the last year, to me, has been absolutely unbelievable, leveraging it all around my business, all around my life, really, as well. What we're going to focus on today with this amazing panel is supply chain specifically. I'll tell you a World Bank quote that supply chain inefficiency is the #1 problem to solve in the world in order to stimulate economic growth. That holds true today. It is a $2 trillion problem to solve. It's all about these inefficiencies in supply chain. We have 40 points of handling down the average supply chain, causing a ton of inefficiencies, a ton of delays. So with this new government coming into play, listen, rhetoric is one thing. We want to see a lot of action, of course. But we have Elon Musk potentially as part of the administration, RFK, who's very technologically forward as well. I'm excited with the direction that this administration is going to go based on those people alone being a part of it. I was actually at Bitcoin.com in Nashville, and Donald Trump himself spoke there, and he spoke at length about how he's going to relieve regulation around technologies and digitalization across the United States. So I'm really excited for the next 4 years to see if that actually happens. The words are great, but let's see it happen in front of us. So let's move on to the panelists over here. I'll join them over here, and we'll have a fantastic discussion. Thank you. Thank you. So why don't we start with the quick introductions? So everyone kind of, say who they are and what they do. Why don't we start with Ian at the end over there?
Okay.
Sorry.
Hi all. Thanks for having me again. I'm Ian Taylor. I'm a CEO and co-founder of SIMBA Chain. We were formed back in 2017, and the name comes from a proposal I wrote back there: secure messaging using a blockchain architecture. And then, since then, part of the introduction was our initial platform designed to make kind of using Web3 easy. And then more recent to that, we've been involved in using DIDs and verifiable credentials to essentially create an overlay that can map to digital assets and provide a data layer, permission data layer to those assets. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Fascinating. We'll move on to Dr. Beck over here.
Sorry about that, technical difficulties. Dave Beck, Space Force, Space Systems Command. I'm in charge of the space industrial base, supply chain, also space access, mobility, logistics, as I'm assuming that role full-time in January. So if you're not familiar with Space Force, we were created in December 19, 2020 by declaration from President Trump. So our mission is to protect and defend. We also manage and work directly close with NRO, NDA, and other organizations within the federal government space. And I just left a meeting with NRO on standards. Standardization in blockchain is very important, as well as standardization in all space supply chains. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for that. And Alexander, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander Mann. I'm a Virginia native. I live in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And my company...
Got one.
My company, SmartGrow AgriTech, works with small to medium-sized farms in the Shenandoah Valley. Currently have about 22 weather stations deployed across 24 farms, and we are streaming that data to the blockchain. So we're interested in seeing what type of downstream applications that this technology can bring to our farmers and to our ag communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. And just to give you a little background on myself as well, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Morpheus.Network. It's a supply chain automation platform. I'm also a UN supply chain expert, and I teach a masterclass on paperless trade for the UN as well. So we're gonna get into some standardization talk, some technology and trust as well. I talk some ag, some research as well that you're doing. So Ian, I'll start with you if you don't mind. I was gonna ask you, when it comes to leveraging the blockchain for a supply chain, you can start as high as you want and go as technical as you want, probably more technical than anyone here can understand, but up to you. Where do you see the advantages of blockchain within a supply chain? You might have heard this before.
How much time do I got?
36 minutes, yeah.
36 minutes, okay, that should be enough. Okay, maybe I start off, so we're active. We've got contracts with the Air Force currently, and which has been great. We're doing a StratFire right now, which is, they talked about SEBAs yesterday. The StratFire is basically a phase 2.5. It's a bridge to get into kind of more serious programs. So the, in terms of DoD, they don't really, they're not really interested in the technology per se. They're interested in the benefits, right? So the benefits that we bring, and I can dig into the approach, the benefits we bring to that effort, which is a supply chain effort as well, is really kind of bringing in data in such a way that it's non-changeable. So if you think about that, we're already deployed in an IL-5 environment. That's very secure as it is. But if an adversary got into that environment, if you've got this data that's non-changeable, they can't do anything with it, even if they get into that environment. So, and that data is coming in our case, it's coming in from OEMs and tier 1 suppliers. So we set up this kind of zero trust network that enables us to bring in data from live systems and ERP systems. So when a sub-tier is an order's placed, and the lead time and things like that. So all of that data comes together. We kind of bring it into the blockchain, we secure it on the blockchain, and then we've got this mechanism that we use to label each of those transactions so that we can populate a graph database with that data, and then that can be used for predictive analytics, and that's the kind of the main benefit of the program. So I can leave it there and then talk about the technology.
That's amazing. I'm sure you can go much deeper. I've had those discussions with you in the past. What I love about the fact that you're bringing in that data, you can repurpose that data across the supply chain, whether you're using it for insurance, shipping documentation, compliance, whatever it is, repurposing it gives it that value to it as well. Dr. Beck, and I turn it to you to discuss a little bit of the space supply chain. I'm sure everyone in the room has some questions about that specifically. Can you talk maybe at a high level of what you guys are up to, what you can reveal to us, of course?
That was a very thorough statement. So from Space Force capability, I think we started looking at blockchain a few years ago, but from a DoD perspective, as a colleague next to me said, we don't really look at the technology as much as we look at how it lands and defends and protects our system in space. So I want to give a shout out to DigiFoundry for being on top of the ball and making that rise in technology a part of our echelon for space. So from a Space Force capability, we're actually looking at a blockchain launch in a few months, maybe less than a year, to back up with the one that's we're doing at Vandenberg with DigiFoundry. So they're looking at it, but I think for our standpoint, we don't really do a lot of technology innovation in Space Force. We're relying on supply chain. So I want to throw this out to everybody out here. If you have a technology you think that Space Force can use, I am here to support that 100% in blockchain. So I would give you guys a letter of recommendation to get your technology equipped and ready to work within all the systems in our PEO. So I want to make sure I push that out because I think it's important to give our supply chain top-level support in terms of that. We need more supply chain. We need more integration. We need more thoughts and ideas like our colleague next door, my colleague next door here, who are bringing capability to space. And it's our job as supply chain people to do that. So thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that sounds like an awesome opportunity to work with Space Force. So after the panel, please, guys, Dr. Beck is open to that. Alexander, I'll throw it over to you. A little bit different. You're working with farmers, of course. Can we talk about, right from the ground level, the advantages of leveraging blockchain within your system and how the farmers are taking advantage of that as well? You can give us some more color.
Yeah, love to. So with the, putting weather data on the blockchain seems kind of counterintuitive, and it doesn't make much sense to put weather data from one single blockchain, or put weather data from one single station on a blockchain. And I'm really excited about the downstream applications when we grow this network and we have many farms with many weather stations across large geographic areas. And to that extent, I reached out to the weather station manufacturer that I am deploying, Weatherflow Tempest, a US-based company out of California. And they have amassed in 3.5 years a network of about 90,000 standardized weather stations across the globe. And they were interested in my use case of using their API to do a carbon copy of the weather data to the blockchain and what we were using that for. And some of the things that we're looking into is smart contracts with insurance to help be a trustless source of information to help settle claims and inform when like risk or a claimable event happens. Furthermore, the state of Virginia is very up and coming in the wine industry nationally. And so there's a premium on Virginia-grown fruit. And we're seeing a lot of fraud in the market where you have bad actors that are trucking in out-of-state fruit and mislabeling, misrepresenting that as Virginia-grown grapes. And so that's an example of fraud in the supply chain that could be fixed with blockchain provenance. And if we can prove, tell the story of that product, where was it grown, what went into it, how did it get from the seed to the bottle, that's something that I think will really resonate with consumers. And it also helps to protect the economics of trade. So, really excited. And just one last thing about the weather station manufacturer. They saw an interest in our use case, and they've granted a API key to allow some benchmark testing. We completed early summer 5,000 stations posting at a 5-minute sample rate of stations around the DC metro area. They were those results were promising, and they've since turned that API key up to 15,000. So we hope to, by the end of this month, be running another benchmark test. We're doing it for 7 days. The sentiment that's been echoed on other panels is, there's many different blockchain networks out there, many different, no unified protocol or standard. And so, we're definitely in the testing phase, and we want to see what works, what doesn't, find any blind spots that might exist, and slowly step this up.
Awesome, great stuff. Exciting to hear about these, startups like yourself dealing with these farmers, right? You think of like a scaled-up solution. We're talking millions of farmers in India and China, all around the world, that can take advantage of these sort of solutions itself. What I'm excited about is, we mentioned the new government that's coming in. In Canada in 2019, the government actually passed a regulation, the CFIA, it's RFDA, forcing companies to be compliant with food certification. Or before, they weren't up to date necessarily. So we've built these amazing solutions now where we're implemented with Federated Co-op, the third largest food distributor in Canada, to, in a completely automated fashion, pull in all those food certificates, all the farmers, all the suppliers, every single piece of food off the shelf. You can pick it up in any one of the 2,500 stores, scan a QR, and see exactly where that farm, where it came from, where the certificates are attached to it. So that's like an example of a top-down approach using the government to push ahead technology. So Ian, I'm gonna go back to Dr. Beck, of course.
I just want to add, from a space standpoint, that's a very important key the two gentlemen just said. We need to do the same thing for space. Like supply chain, right now we can look at 3rd, 4th level supply chain. We can't go down to the 10th, 11th level, right? There's an adversary lurking somewhere in those areas. And the software systems that you're looking at, mainly, and I'm not going to say they're generically the same thing, but that's something that we need to look at, the point discovery, where it is initiate at, right? So when you launch a system in space, you want to see, okay, from day one, how is it working? From the supply base, and when it was built, how it was built, the quality of parts, to when it's sitting up there for 30 years, and what if you want to bring it back to life? You have the data sets to look at that technology and assess it real time. exactly what you have in orbit to use to protect and defend.
Exactly right. It's digitalization, having data available. You're going to run into these manual processes that are like a wall. You're like, oh, we got to look at a file cabinet at this point. So yeah, that's going to push the whole thing ahead. I was going to come back to you as well, Ian, just regarding working with, let's say, aerospace companies and making sure that parts are, as we were mentioning for the agriculture industry, to make sure the wines are legit or the grapes are legit. What happens to the aerospace industry as well in projects that you're up to? Is that something you guys run into?
Yeah, so we're working with OEMs and tier one suppliers right now. The way kind of it works, maybe if I go through a flow, it's going to get a bit technical, but I guess this quote is
we can try.
Good. So you imagine kind of an OEM queries their internal systems. They get information. So it's their information. They choose to supply that information with the Air Force, for example. And the query of that information, they need to send it then to the Air Force securely. And what we use is a layer of decentralized identifiers, which are an identifier, but they come with a public-private key, so you can identify yourself using that public-private key, which can be rekeyed if you lose the keys. So that's kind of an aspect of it. So what they do is they take the data, they sign the data with their private key, so you know where the data is coming from. And then they sign the data with the DID of the software agent that is receiving the data. Not sign, encrypt. So they're encrypting the data using the public key of the receiver, so that when they send that data, it's fully encrypted, but it's encrypted by those two participants, right? So when our receiver receives that information, it can use the private key of itself to decrypt that data, so they get the data, and then they can look at the digital signature, and we keep a registry on chain of all of the DIDs and what the public keys are for the DIDs, so we can look that digital signature up and understand that that comes from a particular OEM or not. So that's one part of it, and then when it comes into the system, then we store it, and we store it basically in a normal file system. In our case, it's blob storage. And then we stand up an NFT that represents that data. So in the NFT, you got a content-based hash of the data that comes in. It could be one, it could be multiple files. And that NFT then acts as a gatekeeper for that data. And then we use the same scheme, the DIDs and the verifiable credentials, to give permissions to that data. So OEM could issue a credential to a tier one supplier. And if they have that credential, which is signed by the data owner, and they present that to the NFT, what happens is the NFT uses the verifier component that we've created that looks at the digital signature of the credential to ensure that it's somebody we trust within this domain. It's the data owner, so that would make sense. And then we do a challenge on their private key. So we need to know that the DID that's sent, that this credential is issued to, is that in fact this credential is presented by them and nobody else. So we send them a number, they encrypt the number with their private key. We look up the public key, we decrypt that and see if it's the same number. If it is, they prove their identity. And once those two checks happen, they get access, they get a token to the data. So that's the only way you can get to the data. So that way, the OEM is secure. It's a zero trust mechanism. You don't get access to anything until you give them permission to do so. And that's, the OEM knows that nobody else can get to the data unless they digitally sign a document and give it to somebody, giving them permission to do so.
That security authentication, just unbelievable. Their description was great. Hopefully everyone was following there because it was amazing. The other side of it, besides obviously security, very important. Everyone's looking at the environment right now as well. I know people are looking at things, like factories and so on, but an EPA stat that 90% of all carbon emissions are in the supply chains of businesses. So if we really want to clean up the environment in the United States, specifically with businesses, we got to look at the supply chains, and obviously we're all working on that. Alex, can I throw it over to you? Maybe discuss what you've been working on, sustainability, reducing that carbon footprint for the companies you work with.
Yeah, so before COVID, I think like 2016 to 2019 or so, I was working in the tower crane construction industry. When you were driving into DC, those giant towers you saw coming in, I was the one putting those up, and all up and down the East Coast. And so, I had a bird's eye view about how infrastructure was built in cities, how the concrete was poured, how the steel workers did what they do, et cetera. And over those few years, looking out at the concrete jungle and thinking, man, there's got to be a better way. And that's when I started to look into the ESG initiative and also, carbon credits and things of that nature. And getting really personally frustrated at the lack of accountability, the lack of traceability. I think a good example is like when you go to you book a flight and they have that little ticker checkbox there and you check it. It's mostly just a feel-good mechanism. There's not much auditability. You as the person paying money for that carbon offset can't go through an audit, in most cases, exactly where the carbon that you're offsetting is attributed to and what the permanence of that is. How long is it staying out of the carbon cycle? So that's when I got really interested in industrial hemp and its ability to sequester carbon in a very short cycle and in high amounts, and then be used for real products, for buildings, for textiles, for hempcrete. There's many different uses for it. A company that I was inspired to leave the tower crane industry and join down in, that's how I wound up in Harrisonburg. I lived in Arlington before. Is Pure Shenandoah, and they're actually pioneering. They were awarded a phase 1 SIBR grant to explore the carbon negative building materials through industrial hemp, and really with like going back to cleaning up the supply chain. I think IoT can play a big role in this, and looking at chain of custody too. If we enable IoT devices that can self-report, for example, self-funded wallets and devices that can post their own, digitally sign and post their own transactions to a blockchain, then you're automating different change points along that supply chain and making it more auditable, making it more transparent. And in the farm use case with the IoT sensors, I have a vision. It currently isn't possible right now, but in the near future, we're looking at using IPv6 to broadcast transactions directly to the blockchain. And one of the things that I've been doing at the legislative level is trying to advocate for what constitutes a financial transaction / security versus what constitutes a database utility transaction, and helping legislators wrap their heads around and navigate what the definitions are, where that line in the sand lies. Because for me as a small business owner, the prospect of having all of my weather station transactions designated as securities and registering to be a financial securities broker is really prohibitive for enterprise level blockchain adoption into my use case. So those are some thoughts that I have around the supply chain, around kind of cleaning up the negative carbon footprint around it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just to comment quickly on that, again, I don't know what's going to go through, but just hearing Trump and RFK and other people in the administration talk about regulation around technologies, what you're talking about, hopefully that gets pushed by the wayside and you can just build and not worry about the SEC or something coming after you. I think we have some SEC reps, so
that's the hope.
Maybe we can talk to them about it. But.
Enabling robust public-private partnerships where the legislators are actually listening to people that are, looking to adopt this out in the field. And, I feel like we have a lot of companies that are kind of waiting on the sidelines to see how it shakes out, to see what type of legislation, to see what the technical definitions are before they go all in and invest in new infrastructure or changing up how business as usual has been done.
Yeah, to be honest, it seems ridiculous that you can't just use a tech, like you were saying. The benefit of the tech is what the companies are after. If it's some sort of store of value investment thing, then I get it, but how do you not let technology grow with companies actually using it for their own benefit to make more money for everybody, more taxes, more et cetera. So, going back to the carbon credits, I know you guys are doing some amazing stuff on that front as well. Can I ask you what SIMBA's up to when it comes to carbon emission reduction?
So we're involved in a couple of different things. So one of which is the Digital Product Passport Initiative and the EU regulation that's coming in. And I think that's exciting because in terms of supply chain, that gives the user, basically, for those who have not heard that term, it's an EU regulation that demands full transparency across the supply chain of every product that's sold in Europe, down to the kind of raw minerals. So if you get that kind of visibility, consumers can make a choice whether they want to be ethical or whether they want to promote sustainability. So I think that that's something we're passionate about getting involved in. We've had numerous discussions, 2 pilots, so we're starting to get into that. So that's one aspect. In terms of ESG, one of the primary use cases of this what I described earlier, there's an extra piece I didn't describe. So imagine a ESG use case using the same system. You send the data that proves it's one volunteer carbon credit to our system. We store it off chain. We stand up that credential. Now that credential, to get into that data, you could be a role in the network of verifier, right? So you use your verifier credential, and we've got attributes in these credentials to set up that kind of thing. You go in, get the data, you take the data, you look at the data, is this valid or is this not, right? And you say, okay, this is valid. This bubbles up to one volunteer carbon credit. They can then, the NFT that represents that data also gets a DID, an identity too. So now the verifier can issue a credential, digitally sign that to know that verifier verified that information, and issue that to the DID of the NFT that represents the data. So therefore, you have this notion, like in ESG now, there's one company, Vera, in DC, that does 70% of the verifications, and none of that data is private. This would enable kind of a public verifiability layer, but keep the data private too. So that's kind of what we've been doing.
Fantastic, fantastic. Listen, the four of us were working on supply chains, trying to make them more efficient, obviously, as we go along, and hopefully reducing that carbon footprint will save the world. Let's reduce the CO2. But let's be real, in an ominous view of it, if that doesn't work, we're going to have to look to space, and we're going to need a space supply chain. We're going to need something like a space force to develop somewhere for us to go. So can I ask, over the next 5-10 years, given an optimistic perspective, what is Space Force up to over the next 5-10 years? Because we're all interested.
I'll say 2036. I know General Gutlein, when he was Lieutenant Gutlein, he was over SSC, talked about the 2036 plan for proliferation to protect and defend. Amongst that is the lower level areas of looking at supply chain on the planet, looking at ways we can reduce carbon footprint on supply chain. So one of the issues we have, like hydrazine. Hydrazine is one of the most dangerous, environmentally effective propulsion, liquids that we use. It's sourced now mostly from China, which is one of the things we talked about, reducing footprint and bringing it back to the U.S. But to produce hydrazine, the only place you can produce it right now is in Louisiana. Those plants produce a similar chemical, and they take bits and pieces of some parts of hydrazine to make a pure hydrazine out of it. It's not a really good business. So from a NASA standpoint, from my Air4L standpoint, we're looking at using green technology propulsion systems. There's two systems right now that Air4L is looking at with NASA. In that process, it'll take many years because you can't get NASA to start using it tomorrow. But due to the things in the supply chain that are happening right now, a couple of the supply chain fuels are starting to dry out because of the embargo from China. That may change in the new administration, who knows? But right now, that's really stinging our supply chain from the fuel standpoint. And you look at hypersonics. So hypersonics is one, too. It uses a lot of fuel, a lot of different energy consumption, maybe using fusion drives for hypersonics. That's something we're looking at doing. It's a company in Southern California. Actually, I'm mentoring a company right now. They're actually in Arlington, Virginia. They do a fusion engine. So those are areas of something we're looking at as well. Also looking at additive manufacturing. As you guys probably know or don't know, American Makes is one of the 8 different locations in the U.S. that's managed and sponsored by OSD R&E to look at ways to reduce the footprint, manufacture space and aerospace components sustainably, and also build a better ecosystem so they can last longer and perform at a higher rate. So I'm on the executive committee for American Makes as of July, and I'm looking at areas to help mitigate those concerns in the supply chain by giving up a lot of areas of concern and bringing those additive manufacturing pieces into that point. Also elevating some of those technology innovation companies as well, and looking at ways that we can get those on the supply chain registry and DOD and get those on programs. So that's some things we're looking at as well from the Earth standpoint. From space, I would say we have 10 billion pounds of space junk up there, right? So I ain't saying we need a company, a garbage company with a green logo come and say we need to clean up space. But we do need innovation in the space area. We need that. We need companies to go up there and repurpose, take these old satellites, take them and break them down to their chemical and material form, and then repurpose them. So when SpaceX signed the ISS project that decommissioned ISS, we're looking at now through ISS Group in Digital Foundry ways we can take those components, break them down, build a new system, new satellites in space manufacturing. Part of my job is space access, mobility, and logistics is looking at those problematic situations where we can break those technologies down, repurpose them, maybe build sustainable housing in space for astronauts, for scientists, for doctors, to do data his company, to do farming with his company. You never know, but that's something we're looking at for the future. But we have to get the space junk out. Right now, it's an issue in LEO, and everybody knows it. We talk about it, we see it on the space news all the time. Proliferation of launching something in LEO is getting very crowded because of space junk. So those are many areas we're looking at, but future-wise, we need all our supply chain innovation, people in the audience, and blockchain, ways we can reduce waste, look at moving technology forward, using blockchain. I'm not like blockchain expert, so I can't speak really highly upon that, but I know it works, and we can find ways to make it work for our supply chain.
We have Ian here, don't worry, he'll cover us for sure. So one thing for sure about the space industry in general, we had the whole election news cycle going on for a while. Cut right through that cycle was Elon Musk catching that rocket with that gantry. Everyone saw that as like, oh my gosh, that is unbelievable, that cut through. No one was paying attention to Democrat, Republican stuff at that point. So.
Right, and to Elon Musk, I'm very proud of SpaceX and what they've done. They provided us a viable resource for sustainable launch capability in space. I wish Boeing was at that point. I'm not throwing any shade here, but I think we got a lot to learn. We got a lot to learn because the thing is, it doesn't matter how big your company are, how much money you got. Is it enthusiastic engineers, the worker bees? Everybody in this room has been a worker bee. I am as well. It's just the worker bees to get the work done. We have to listen to the engineers and scientists, people with the knowledge in their head that have capability to fix these problems. So I say to SpaceX and other companies, we need more diversity. We need more launch capability because guess what? It's not just Space Force using, it's gonna be his company using for space. His company using when they branch out and do other things. Everybody needs more launch capability for future space exploration.
I'm such a supply chain nerd. The second I saw that thing land, I'm like, wow, they can ship with that thing. That's how they're gonna ship things off, right?
That's what autonomous do for you, right? Autonomous systems. That's a great example of autonomous ingenuity.
Yeah,
we need
really
that.
Unbelievable. And you mentioned a whole bunch of amazing technologies. You mentioned as well before, Alexander, bring it back to you. We mentioned IoT, the weather stations, blockchain. Can I ask you just a general, from the ground level, you're working on a different plane than the rest of us. You're working with these farmers right on the ground field. What technology talking to the farmers, to the actual, these guys with the dirt on their fingers? Can you tell a little bit about that? Start with a cliche.
You left out the flip cell phone as well, that a lot of them still have. Yeah, it's it's challenging. We need to find ways to make these technological advances palpable to the demographic of producers that are usually hesitant to adopt new technologies. I'm not coming into a farmer's operation and trying to flip the table and turn the script and tell them, this is how you need to do things. I go in with an open mind. I sit down with them and, try to listen to how they do what they do and look for any opportunities to collect, some data points or to provide some insight. And one tangible example of success that I've had is, I make my own fancy custom dashboards. For example, like I have a spray forecast dashboard that uses AI to answer the question, over the next 7 days, when is the best time to spray? And it gives you some target windows for that work. But that dashboard is very busy. There's colors, charts, bars, graphs, and to most of the older school farmers, that just doesn't fly. It doesn't mesh. They'll look at that and get stressed out. So I've been using large language models and AI to essentially take the raw data that I'm using to calculate and populate those dashboards and create a more palpable kind of Sunday-style digest of like, hey, over the next 7 days, and then break it down in headers that's easy to understand, and it's automated, a click of a button, and it transforms that data. So looking at how we can not just tell businesses or tell producers how they should be using this technology, but bridging the gap and working with them to find pinch points or pain points or areas where this novel technology can help what they're already doing.
That's amazing. Yeah, we're doing a project with the European Union as well for deforestation regulation, and again, it's similar to have to know the history of the product, the supply chain traceability, where the products come from, make sure that the deforestation wasn't part of that supply chain specifically. So we're using a whole bunch of text to do this, and again, it's getting thousands and thousands of companies to hop on to new technologies when they never would before. So now this top-down approach has been amazing. Ian, your sort of like interaction with, let's say like Department of Defense, working with, Air Force, a little bit different than what he's doing with the farmers on the ground level. We might have some government people in here as well, in the crowd. If you had to say challenges you've had in landing projects or getting the things pushed through, things implemented, right? Things you'd like to improve. Or if you want to see the other side, things that have been very easy to go through, right? Please, divulge for us.
Well, we have done some sustainable stuff too, but we'll get into that later maybe. But in terms of working with the government, I think some of the challenges are, if you think about phase 1, SIMBA's phase 2, it's very difficult to kind of get past phase 2, number 1. That's a very challenging kind of bridge to jump. But also even phase 1 and phase 2s, we've had a phase 2 recently that should have come under contract in a month. It took 4.5 months. There are contracting delays. I guess you experience similar issues. But there's also often a gap between phase 1 and phase 2, which kind of doesn't help to continue, the continuity of the kind of research. And phase 1 is basically an architecture design kind of phase, and then phase 2 is an implementation, which gets to something that actually somebody can use. So there's that side of the contracting is it's not you can't rely. It doesn't give you that stability sometimes for those reasons. In terms of the other challenge is really the Air Force or any member of any division, it can't really use anything unless it's in a relevant environment. And getting in a relevant environment is extremely difficult. It took us, it's a multi-year process essentially. And that there's 2 ways of doing that. There's things like Platform 1, which go through every single line of code and dependencies, which is really an arduous process to say the least. And then we're more in kind of a continuous ATO environment, which is basically based on DevSecOps pipelines. So it's based on container monitoring rather than code monitoring. That's a simpler process, but for a startup, for somebody who wants to engage in the DoD, to get to that kind of sustained contracting kind of vehicles, you have to be in one of those environments, or FedRAMP is the other option.
Very cool, very cool. We have 5 minutes left in our panel, and really this is going to be a selfish question. I'm asking you, Dr. Beck, here, if you don't mind. Yeah, go ahead. You had a follow-up?
I'm listening and I'm thinking, it'd be good to have a blockchain work group for space to see where we can create standards. Back to my first comment about standardization. Our meeting today at NRO was about standards, and standards are very vital to building a great programmatic work product. So for blockchain, it's the same thing. We need to look at standardizations around blockchain for space applications. Using maybe a modified FAR approach like we did at FAA when I was at FAA to build this centric technology up into the LEO, GEO, HEOs, and cislunar, because it's needed. And right now, this is the best time to do it because of what's happening in the change administration, the opportunity where the lights would be on, like in this room, on us on stage, on this particular technology innovation.
No, I completely agree. I'm excited for the next, again, words are one thing. We want to see some action, but it does sound fantastic.
I'm willing to put my name in the line. I will sign something to help with that. I'm only a, low-hanging fruit guy. I'm not the secretary level, but I will engage.
All right, awesome. Let's say, we have some technology companies out here. If they're looking to get involved with Space Force supply chain, what are you looking for? What companies do to try to work with you? Besides talking to you, of course, but maybe more, I guess, specifically.
Well, Ian talked about the Strat-5 TIE-5. So I have an ability to be a POC for Strat-5 TIE-5, SIBRs, SIBR 1s, 2s. The fact that, 8 years ago I wrote a pamphlet on how to do SIBR 101. We still haven't got to a point where the SIBR process is STTR process. It's a golden child. But it can be a gateway to a specific, dual approach usage for commercial use for your application of technology or hardware. So we got to work closely with that. So I think from my perspective, I want to help do a dual approach. So right now we're working at several venture capital companies that are looking at funding companies out of SIMBA to get them sustainable. We have a lot of issues in our supply chain industrial base. We did not hit that today. We are not with a stable supply chain industrial base, but it can be with you. So that's my point of discovery here, that we need you to get that. And I'm here to help facilitate that as a government employee. Over.
Great answer. Yeah, I love that. Everyone's taking notes on that, I'm sure. So one last thing I was going to say, actually, we were about 28 minutes in, and we haven't talked much about AI. And, nowadays, AI is, everywhere you can look, you're seeing AI implementations and uses and so on. And I know it's all about, digitalization when you're bringing in data from IoT devices, leveraging blockchain to store that data. But once you have that data, a couple minutes, open up the floor to you. Can you maybe preach some AI greatness? How do you see AI leveraging the data they're bringing in from supply chains, whether on the farm level or any level going forward?
Well, my hope is to get the entire Tempest network of weather stations on a layer 1, and then build a robust AI-enabled overlay where, at that point it becomes not just a single industry specific. It can be, customers from all different aspects of the supply chain, from governments to private enterprise, can leverage that data, leverage that on-chain data. And, I would like to see the AI, a user be able to ask a question of the AI, and the AI can go in, retrieve the relevant data needed to answer that question, and have robust forecasting models, better insurance, better quality control for products and for consumers alike. So the time's running out, so I'll pass it on.
Okay, 20 seconds.
Go
Two
ahead.
things.
Yep.
One, AI where the software or hardware systems are integrated within space so they can communicate with each other, be turned on, turned off at a moment's notice, using supply chain efforts the companies here can discover. Number two, workforce development for regenerative AI and cognitive AI, ethical AI, so we can train the workforce to be ready for AI and the derivatives of AI using large language models, and also artificial intelligence derivatives when they get into the workforce, so we can have a better innovative sector sitting in front of us today to do the technologies for us, the Space Force.
Take 2 more minutes. Take 2 more minutes if you need it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so AI. So I think one of the most promising things, aside from using blockchain to secure models and provenance to data and things like that, the use of graph databases with AI is really promising, because you can, graph databases are kind of aligned to do, to answer questions, because they're a graph of that kind of segments the information in a way that you want to retrieve it. So using that with AI can do scenarios like, for example, you can send to the AI a question that can convert it into cipher code, which is what you pass to a graph database. You can have existing data in the graph database to answer that question, and then you can pass it back to the AI to fluff it out. And that approach, you can also use AI to generate the graph database in the first place. And what that all bubbles up and leads to is a trusted AI solution, because you know where the answers came from. You don't know in those 21 different hidden layers what piece gave you the answer. So I think that's a real promising thing.
Transparency's there then, for sure. Great answer, great answer. We are past our time, but we are taking Q&A, and I already see a couple of hands up. So I'll start with this gentleman over here. I thought I saw his hand. Sorry, sorry. Oh, no. Sorry, no.
You're infringing on the next.
Sorry.
The friend zone.
No questions?
No questions. I know, meaning. No questions. You're going to like, though, this. The follow